Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for webinar on demand forecasting in the new normal. My name is Ankit Pujara, and I'm a part of Partnership and Alliances team at Fractal. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and would be available as an on-demand session on Fractal website at fractal.ai. The attendees are currently in listen-only mode. To revamp the businesses and plan their strategies in highly uncertain post-pandemic scenario, or so-called the new normal, demand is the most essential element of every organization's planning process. In this session, we will discuss on demand forecasting, why demand forecasting pre and post-COVID, trends in demand forecasting solution by Fractal, and lastly, how Fractal, AWS, and Nielsen can help you get started on demand forecasting. Joining us, we have Justin Horneman. Justin is the head of worldwide consumer products, food and beverages at Amazon Web Services. Thank you so much, Justin, for joining us. Joining Justin, we have Russell Sylvester. Russell is the European market leader for Connect Partner Network at Nielsen IQ. Thank you so much, Russell, for joining us. And joining Russell and Beata, Justin and Russell, we have Beata Letterman. Beata is a principal consultant at Fractal. Now, I'll hand it over to the speakers for a quick run through the topic. Russell, over to you.
Cool. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to join you today. So I just want to take you through a few slides. And to be honest with you, most of it's a bit of a history lesson, but it's just to reinforce how difficult it is nowadays to forecast. I mean, it wasn't easy beforehand, but it was certainly easier. You know, we had a few difficulties where we had to move Easter every now and again because it fell on different weekends, and you could generally get away with using KGAR and previous history and a bit of local knowledge. But now, as we can see on the next slide, what's happened since we've had COVID. Cool. So a bit of a step back. So we can see that the first case in COVID hit the 31st of January, and then across the bottom you can see how it affected value sales. So as we went across the timeline of COVID for 2020, you can see as each stage happened, there was a significant increase in value sales at a peak of when the restaurants and pubs closed of a 44% increase on year, which makes it really hard to forecast because historically you need historical data to forecast forward. And because this was unprecedented, it really did throw a spanner in the works on how businesses forecasted in the future. Next slide, please. And just to give you an idea of the size of the impact that had. So in the 8 weeks from the 18th of April, in the UK, there's 18.9 billion spent, which is 3.8% more than Christmas and 12.8% on the same period last year. And also during a key stockpiling period, there was 21% up. Now, stockpiling creates more than one problem. So stockpiling, you may think you're just mortgaging sales that would have happened before because you know you can only use so much toilet paper, you can only use so much toothpaste. But what actually happens is, and you can relate this to your own experiences, if you haven't got another tube of toothpaste in the bathroom, you will make that tube of toothpaste last an extra 3 days because you squeeze it all out. Whereas if you've got another one sat there, you'll chuck it away. And what happens is that also increases consumption because you've got it in the house. Next slide, please. And what it also did as well, also changed the way in which the shoppers behave. So previously, there used to be a fairly high number of occasions of trips by buyer with a lower value purchase per occasion. And what happened, that basically flipped overnight from going to less occasions and a higher purchase price. And Dave Lewis was quoted as to say, the weekly shop is back in fashion. Not quite, but it was certainly closer to what it was prior to COVID. So again, that's another factor that makes it really hard to forecast. Next slide, please. So as well as all of that, what we've got is households who actually increase their repertoire of categories that we're buying for the household. So on average, a household would buy 52.7 categories per month, and that shot up to 59.3, which is an increase of 12.5 percentage points. And then the household categories that were impacted the most, as you would expect, would be soap, jumped up by 70.5%. Canned soup, facial tissues. We all know about toilet rolls. We couldn't get toilet rolls anywhere in the UK. Noodles, canned veg. So you can see that, again, households were buying into categories that they wouldn't normally buy into. Next slide, please. And then what also happened as well is shoppers changed where they shopped. So what happened is, instead of families and shoppers going to their traditional, they'd always go to their Tesco's, which was maybe an extra, which was a bit of a drive. What happened is they went to proximity rather than destination. So we could see that by the increase in convenience. So shoppers were actually moving to shopping where it was closest. And we saw this where retailers that had really good spread of their estate, close to housing estates, done really well out of it. Thank you. And then once we've changed all of that, so the number of times we shopped, how much we bought, the categories we bought, where we bought it, we then decided, oh, let's all go online. So we went from 14.4% growth of total online to 49.4%. And the impact that had within the FMCG sector was online grew from 7% to 10% very quickly. And my opinion is that figure would have been much higher if retailers had the capacity to deliver more. So, we all saw that there was slots, people couldn't get slots. Slots had to be allocated to certain age groups and working groups such as the NHS because they couldn't get the slots. So again, this is another change in shopper behaviour that we couldn't have foreseen. Next slide, please. And also what happened as well, it was shoppers tend to defaulted to what they knew best and what they trusted. So traditionally, shoppers were looking for price, they were looking for promotion, and private label, what it used to be 10 years ago, is private label as a brand in its own right, and it was doing really well, and it wasn't the stigma as it's Tesco value. It's private label products these days are really good products. But what happened is we saw shoppers reverting back to the brand leaders within certain categories, and this was really evident in the health and beauty and personal care, where the number one brands within the categories started growing really quickly because shoppers moved back to those brands they trusted. And then also we had the knock on promotion. So this is from a shopper survey. So this is claimed behaviour. So in January, 34% of households were actively looking for prices that were on promotion, and this dropped by 12 percentage points to 22% in April, where promotions were less important. And then there's the next 32% which actively trying. Can you just go back, please? We're trying to buy on promotion. Again, that fell. And then also the price comparison. So comparing prices more carefully kind of fell out the window. My personal opinion is due to there wasn't enough freedom for people to go and fulfill. So even if they did find it, they didn't want to go and make another trip to get it. So that kind of went out the window as well. Next slide, please. And then what also happened as well is with the boom with e-com due to COVID, we also saw a dramatic increase with online, and the main area, and we called them silver shoppers, was the households that were made up of 65+ year olds. Now, protective households went from 1.9 to shopping online to 33.6 million households shopping online, which then went from their annual spend of 0.7 billion to 2.4 billion. So it went from almost the lowest to the highest demographic that was shopping online. And I think one of the things that retailers and manufacturers need to look at forward is how to keep these shoppers that now it's a learned forced behavior of shopping online, is how to keep them engaged with online. Next slide, please. So just a quick summary of what I've gone through. So there was 18.9 billion spent in the 8 weeks due to lockdown. Stockpiling led to increased consumption and erratic shopping behaviours. Occasions decreased and purchase value per occasion increased. More categories were being purchased. Shoppers decided to shop based on proximity rather than destination. Online grew overnight. Trusted brands had a resurgence. Shoppers were less concerned about promotions, but also the fact that supermarkets were also reducing promotions to avoid bulk buying, and also to maintain stock levels. And the silver shoppers from online, the 65+ went from 0.7 billion to 2.4 billion really quickly. Hence why it's quite difficult to forecast when we've got all of these factors that have just happened recently that are unprecedented. Thank you. And I believe I'm handing over to Justin now.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Russell. So, hey, everybody, Justin Hahnemann. I am here at AWS and Amazon Web Services, for those that aren't familiar. We are the engine behind Amazon.com 2006, spun out AWS to become a broader solution for our customers due to the technology and innovation that AWS provides. And when we work across CPG, I spend my days working with most of the major CPG brands globally. And my specific sector is food and beverage, which is a very exciting time to be in the industry. For those that have been around the industry for a while, you know that it's been pretty steady Eddie, right? And over the years, in the last couple of years have been like true excitement and energy and decision making unlike any other time. And I think maybe the history of consumer products. We'd have to go back and look, but I think that for the most part, the people that I talk to, that things have evolved and changed and advanced in ways that they didn't expect. And so there's a lot of interesting positives that I think are coming out of the last year and a half, 2 years. And one of those is around this space called forecasting, and forecasting as a part of overall supply chain and manufacturing capabilities and solutions is like a number one top priority right now for every one of the customers I work with on a daily basis. The top topic, whether it be the CIO, CTO, and the tech team, or the analytics lead, or the head of the supply chain, even the folks in marketing, consumer insight, shopper insights, literally their first ask is, what can you do to help us with things like forecasting, things like supply chain visibility, things like connected factory and other related topics. But forecasting comes up daily, and for obvious reasons, because it's tough right now. And the models that were used in the past are models that haven't worked, quite frankly, the last 2 years, especially now with some of the disruptions in the overall supply chain. And so it's caused many organizations, people, customers, leaders to say, what's changed and what's different. So you see here on this slide, in terms of the current landscape, many of these things many of you are familiar with. And many of the things I just mentioned, not only the things I mentioned, but also consumer preferences change, consumer route to market has evolved. As you just saw in Russell's slides, which I love the analytics and the data. It's so fun to see that, like, it brings to life like really what's happening, right, with the consumer. But you saw a shift, and now you're seeing a shift back into traditional retail, which is causing a whole interesting discussion around e-commerce and its place in consumer products now. Like last year, it made a lot of sense to have an e-commerce channel. This year, as things are opening up, it's like, is it worth it? Is the cost of shipping and delivery versus, traditional retail channels? Do you go in with an e-commerce provider where there's bundling of capabilities and solutions? All those questions are out there right now. And then all of that leads back into new types of data that are out there and available to enable forecasting or enable a view of demand, if you want to call it that. And now the technology has evolved, in faster ways over the last couple of years that actually enable the data integration, aggregation, and like the ability to pull that together quickly to serve it up to do analytics on top. And that's then what drives some of what you hear out there. The buzzwords of AI and machine learning are real, and they're actually being used. And you're going to see that today, how that comes to life in forecasting. And obviously, what everyone's looking for is accuracy improvements. Just as a quick sidebar, I spent 10 years, you can go back to the previous slide. I spent 10 years at Coca-Cola. When I was there, like our forecast accuracy in the bottling company I was working with was less than 60%. So forecasting is not a new topic, but what is new is the technology that enables it. And then within the retail environment, they're looking to have enough inventory to meet demand, but not too much inventory. There's not a lot of room in the back rooms of most retailers. And of course, everyone's focused on revenue. Now you can hit to the next slide. So a little bit of history, like most of us are familiar with forecasting, but if you look at the left side, right, forecasting is a science of predicting the future. And by looking at historical trends, most organizations can make a call on like what might happen or would happen. That was thrown out the window this last year, 2 years, in terms of like a model that actually works. And so now what you're seeing is an advancement in an investigation and time commitment to look at and see, hey, is there a better way of doing forecasting or a better way of using the new types of data that are out there in a way that makes sense, not only for supply chain, but for all the way up the chain to sourcing and procurement of raw materials. You can hit the next slide now. So we think about business outcomes. So when we go work with customers, and we like, for example, in our CPG fast track model, we go in and we focus on what are the actual problems or challenges or opportunities or business outcomes you're trying to solve for. What's the data that enables it today, and where is it? And then where do you want to be in terms of a future? Like, what are the things you think could be potential future ways of operating or technology to leverage and whatnot, right? And that helps then serve up an approach for a proof of concept, a proof of value, a test, a trial of either technology, new process capabilities, or new types of people in the organization. So as you think about the business outcomes you and the organization are trying to achieve, there could be around inventory planning, and this would be not only at the consumer goods level, but at the retail level. It could be in terms of financial planning, in terms of investments in sourcing and raw materials, all the way through the supply chain process, and then also in the trade promotion and execution part of the process. And of course, kind of some of the more traditional supply chain mechanisms or processes like capacity planning and route to market planning, especially in my world where many of my customers operate using a delivery model called direct store delivery. They don't only go to a retailer's warehouse. There's a lot of factors that go into the planning process and the forecasting process around that. Next slide, please. I only have like one or two more, do not fear. And then we're getting to the good stuff. And so when you think about like Amazon, like this is a space that we're playing in daily, and we always have been. Like our forecasting experience spans over the last 20 years as you look at our e-commerce business, right? And we ship billions of packages a year. We operate in more than 185 different countries. And what we have to do is determine how to manage buying, placement, transfers, removals, like across this network of operating facilities. And by the way, most CPG brands sell through Amazon.com. Many startup CPG brands are on AWS and launching through Amazon.com their new products. So all of this kind of plays into our own like fulfillment and forecasting and planning process, because we've got to make sure we're over delivering for our customers. And many of you have lived that, right? So the question today is, how do you take what we have and what we've brought together, link that to the types of data and insights you're getting from a Nielsen IQ, and then leveraging some of the over-the-top extraordinary like analytic firepower that you get with Fractal. And that's what brought us together today. You can hit the next slide. So if you look at the history of forecasting, you think about like what's evolved over time. I always like to look at things over time. Like if you look at AI is not new. It's actually been around for years. Same thing around forecasting. It's just the how we've done that has evolved. And I'll just say the bottom line here is, while the last couple of years, if you went to an industry event, you heard, well, AI machine learning this, AI machine learning that. And it's like, is that even real? And I would say it was good ideas until the last 2 or 3 years when it's actually come to fruition. And where you're seeing that come to fruition in our world is around forecasting. It is around like outlet execution, image recognition in store. So taking images and then turning that into data and insights. It is around supply chain planning and like the methods around that. It is around like personalization and e-commerce. So there's so many cool use cases now for AI and machine learning. And today you're obviously going to see that around forecasting. And you can see how this has evolved over time. Last slide, one more for you here. In terms of thinking about like, how to think about a model for like making it real in your organization, it's putting together things like the model on the left, which is looking at dollars spent on shrink, for example, in retail versus demand variability. And how do you look at that in a way that's unique? How do you take in the middle different items that are bought by a consumer, either via e-commerce or online or in store, and look at that basket and predict what they're going to buy next, or where there's going to be out of stocks of high volume items? Not so simple in traditional like Excel and access-based forecast models, which, believe it or not, they're still out there. And then on the right side, in terms of just managing over forecasting versus under forecasting, I don't know that anybody's forecasting model would have worked perfectly the last 18 to 20 months. I've asked on many of our industry executive calls, and most of them are, reacting and trying to find a new normal, phrase of the day, in terms of forecasting. And so with that, hopefully that gives you a sense for not only some of the learning platform around consumer and shopper changes, some of the why behind forecasting and methods and process. And now you're going to hear about application in the third part of our webinar today. So I'll hand it over.
Hi, everybody. My name is Beate. I'm a principal consultant at Fractal, and I'm also overseeing our forecasting capabilities at Fractal. And I'm going to look forward to talk you through these. So first of all, as you heard before from Russell and Justin, there's a lot of changes happening in the industry. Right, nothing is as it was. And also what is really interesting, we hear this now again. We thought we kind of over COVID, but now we have wave 4 starting, and we hear this again. What can we do about forecasting? So effectively, when you think about forecasting, what is really needed, you need something obviously with good accuracy. Without accuracy, there's not a good forecast. But what you also want is a system which is agile and adaptable. So if something changes, I need to respond to this very quickly. I need to go at scale. Usually when we talk businesses, we're talking about thousands of products, and we need to forecast at speed to allow for any changes in our forecast. In the moment you think this through, and what Justin was saying, AI and machine learning are buzzwords with a reason, if you like, because they enable us to get us there very, very quickly. If something like, maybe we cannot predict COVID as such, but what we can do, we can adapt to this. So when we think about a forecast solution, it effectively stands on 3 pillars. Was okay. Next slide, please. So when you think about it, we have, first of all, there needs to be some sort of data. Without data, there's nothing. Even if the historical data is, not as meaningful as we hoped it to be, but it's still valuable to have because we can still learn from the past. Then when we think about the data, we cannot just throw data at a machine learning model. We also need to do something with the data. We need to clean it. So there's this whole process of thinking about the data and how my data is going to change in the future as well. Do I need to consider anything? Then there's the big heart of everything, which is the forecasting driven by algorithms. But what you also need is you will need some sort of a consumption layer. So in a platform where the data flows, you have an engine, you also want to consume the forecast and want to see what was actually the forecast, or you want to do something with it. And different people also consume differently. However, the heart of this platform or of any forecasting platform is always the algorithms. And when you start deploying these, go to the next slide, please. So in our platform, what we have effectively more than 25 algorithms who are particularly algorithms designed to deal with forecasting. And it can go from very simple ones to the most complicated ones you can imagine. And how it works, once I have my data, I get this data into the engine, and this engine builds the model itself, if you like. I can tweak it into a certain direction. So saying if I have hardly any data, I don't need to have the most complex algorithms. But if it is required, I can. So you can nudge the engine as you go along, but effectively it covers all algorithm known used in forecasting and more. So the engine develops the best model themselves. It automatically suggests what features is interesting for my forecast. You can say, am I looking at accuracy as a KPI? So how accurate is my forecast? Am I looking at bias, where I underpredict, overpredict? So you get this all in an automatic fashion. And what is really important in this is having an engine like this. This also means that you can do thousands of forecasts very, very fast. So even if we have AI and machine learning in place and you set a data scientist on this, that's fine. I'm sure the data scientist does brilliantly in doing this, but this is also time consuming. And if you want to capture your business, you need to have something in place which makes this really, really fast. And also treat it as something which is growing. It's almost like a forecasting organism. So when COVID happened, it was very quick for us to adjust some of these algorithms to adapt to this need. It's a living organism as such that tomorrow there will be new algorithms to address different needs again. And it's continuously evolving this engine. But what it is, at the end of the day, it is fast. It addresses all sorts of forecasting needs. It's not designed for any need. It can do financial forecasting, can be used in supply chain, it can be used for product forecasting, retail sales for a store. It can do anything. In this regard, it is very, very neutral. So when we go to the next slide, I want to show you some of the results. So when we talk accuracy, which is obviously one of the basics you will need, these algorithms deliver really high accuracies. Remember, the models are getting kind of built themselves. Sometimes it's chosen 3 models together, it ensembles it automatically. But when we see a typical accuracy, even for advanced forecasting capabilities, is around 60 to 80%. So this is already a data scientists have worked on these forecasting models. And in the bubbles, you see the forecasting accuracies which came out of our engine. And it's done on thousands of forecasts across thousands of SKUs. So you see different categories, be it on a regional level, be it on a store level, be it on a county level. We hit the over 80% accuracy demand for good forecasting. We go to the next slide. And now you've heard it. COVID obviously was a huge challenge. So how did that actually look like? We know that once COVID hit, it was everything collapsed. All the forecasting collapsed. Now, when you have these more modern state-of-the-art algorithms, they can very, very quickly sense that something is changing. So it is not, I don't necessarily need to rework everything I've done before. I can introduce a driver. The system starts to know that something changed and it then adjusts the forecast accordingly. So in this example, in pre-COVID, 89% accuracy was a pretty very, very stable market. The 66% is actually not too bad. We saw decreases of much, much more than what we have seen there. But with the algorithms, knowing something is going on, it came very, very quickly back to the 80% mark. And this is this example here is at a very, very early stage of COVID. So COVID hit us, I think, in March. The engine and the forecast was brought back to these higher levels already end of April, beginning of May. So this is this continuous sensing of your data, which is happening. And this is not, like I said, it's independent of the industry you're in. Could be retail, it's financial, CPG. The accuracies, AI machine learning always increases accuracies. And the better the algorithms are, the higher the accuracy gets. And it adds the speed to the whole process. So you see different examples. Sometimes it's only 900 forecasts, but then we also have 100,000 plus forecasts to do. So an engine like this handles anything, and it brings up the potential to scale. And if you are at scale, in the last example, for example, the whole forecast for these over 100,000 models effectively get updated in 4 hours. And we obviously always see the value of improving our forecast accuracies, as Justin mentioned, in the supply chain. So in the moment you improve your demand sensing, this is an example, you obviously optimize your safety stocks. And there's a lot of savings attached to this. And you have an improved service level. It's the natural course of things. Get your accuracies right, and your supply chain is in a much better space. And the savings and also the satisfaction from the customers increases dramatically. Now, there's still no forecasting, as I was saying, without data. We still need data. So when we look at typical data in forecasting, we look at shipments, which is owned by clients, but we obviously here with our partnership with Nielsen look at POS data, at the sales data there. We look at the Nielsen distribution, price, promotional facts, sometimes media investment. And then there are other drivers which we also consider, which is macroeconomics. We have COVID, obviously now. There are holidays, there are many, many more. And it's different by industry. But if you cover these, you already have a very, very good set of data to forecast. If you have nothing, apart from the time series, you still can do it. There's still algorithms to deal with. I have no data whatsoever. You can still forecast with some sort of a time series in the past of your data. But if you don't have any additional drivers, this is not a problem either. But this set usually describes quite well what you need. So, but when we think about the data, and if you want to be reacting to any changes as well, you need to think about how am I dealing with this data? And what you want to do is you want to be as efficient as you can with data. So once you have thought through, this is the data I need, then in the next stage, you then also need to think, what am I going to do if I do it for the next time around and the next time around? So what you want to do, you want to automate this process of data collection, that the data automatically feeds and flows through the system. If we can go to the next slide, please. So effectively, you set your system up. All the data, we know this is the data we're going to consider. We then set it up in an automated fashion. The data gets automatically loaded into the platform. But it's not only the raw data, we also need to do something with the data. The data gets cleaned, gets checked automatically. Sometimes things go wrong. So we need to have a little email warning us that the data source wasn't right. It gets sorted, it gets validated. So, but it's a flow. It just flows in itself and there's very little touch. Now, this alone is worth its investment, if you like, because in forecasting, when you think about it, a demand planner made a forecast, then you look at your forecast and you see how good your accuracy was. Now I want to understand why potentially my forecast was not as good as I hoped it to be. So you need to dig into these data sources. Maybe the distribution, I assume, wasn't right. Maybe there was something else good. So this is the work of the demand planner effectively. But here, it's all there. He doesn't need to dig. It's all there automatically for him or her. So you have to set up, leaves the demand planner so much time now to really deal with the forecast themselves. On the next slide, this is an example what this actually means, and this is just the process when you think of it. So you have thousands of products across more than 10 geographies. The forecast is generated in a span of some few hours. So on a Sunday, the data gets updated when no one is in the office, and on Monday morning, everything is there. Your forecast is there, your data is updated. You can even see what the previous forecast looked like. It is, as I was saying, think about it also that it's an adaptable system. It needs to suit your needs. So we set it up that it works for you. Does the forecast need to go into specific, into your planning books already? Fine, it goes into the planning books. Do you want to have it somewhere else? So all this is done, but here this getting it to scale and having the speed is great. And another thing which is also very important here is once you have your data in this format, and this takes usually a bit of thinking through, and that's why the format change maybe in a year's time, etc. So a bit of thinking required. But in the moment you hit with a new news, the Black Swan event, it is so easy to bring something new into that system, rather than redefining the wheel, setting it all up, doing it all again. It's there. It's just add a little nuance to the system effectively. Go to the next slide, please. So yes, but obviously, once you have the forecast, it also needs to be some sort of consumed. And there are different needs in the company, how the forecast is consumed, and different need states. It's, the demand planner will be very, very much involved in getting accurate forecasts. she will look at performance tracking. But then there's also the opportunity maybe to dig a little bit deeper and understand why is my forecast as my forecast is. Or I think this is probably the highest way you can go with forecasting is when you also attach then simulation capabilities to this. Because what that means is if we are not sure, and COVID was such a great example, so we kind of can make our best estimate, but what is if not? I mean, sometimes no one knows. We can only make an estimate of what we believe, what our belief systems are. But if you then say, what could be the worst case scenario, actually, what is going to happen if this is not true and everything is completely different? You can very quickly simulate this. And this is minutes to see worst case scenarios. Now, there are different consumptions there, how you consume this. We have out-of-the-box reports, which we adjust, where we can look at the forecast. We can integrate with visualization tools. We do custom reports. There's also going into the planning books directly, the forecast. If we go to the next stage. This is an example where probably the demand planner is very interested to see the forecast. It can also potentially override. And this is where the demand planner now has access to all these great algorithms. The algorithms bring him, her a long, long way, but there's still a potential to override because there might be just that final promotion no one could anticipate when the forecast was done. But also track the performance of like accuracy, like bias. I submitted my forecast. First thing I do, I want to see how good my forecast was. And then what we also can do, we can also look into what actually drives the forecast. So category brand management tends to be a little bit more interested in this, but looking into what is it, what drives my forecast in the future? So it could be promotional days, it could be the discounts itself, all the factors we have looked at some minutes ago. All these obviously contribute then to the forecast. And you can concentrate on the most important ones for your business. And also this possibility to have this strategic planning capability in uncertain times. This is so valuable to have because you can prepare. You can always go with your best estimate, but running what if scenarios. And also with this, you can access risk for your business. In the moment you simulate a different price and saying, okay, everything, we're going to increase price, or we're not. What does that actually mean? And would we take then different decisions just based on our pricing for our overall business? Maybe we stop investing in a category if we did this. Maybe we push another product. So all these questions, and this is fast. This is, I'm saying this is not even a minute if you want to do this and test this. So this, in general, when you think about it, it is something, a platform that adjusts to your needs, is implemented either in Fractal AWS environment or in your AWS environment. The data flows, the data comes from Russell, there are other pieces of data we can add. Now, once this is in place, we can still adjust what you need, how you want to consume it. You can see actually the algorithms. This is not a black box. It's nothing where you think, oh my God, this looks spooky. We talk you through. We know what algorithms were chosen by the engine. So if we move on to the next slide. So how can you get started? Effectively, it's always the same questions which need to be answered when we think about, okay, what do we need to get you there very, very quickly? The first question is always, how do you intend to use the forecast? Who is going to use it? Because there are different nuances in a company. Is it demand planning? Is it marketing planning? Is it strategic planning? Because this has then impacts on how we would set everything up. Are there countries in scope? What level of granularity are we actually looking for? Are we looking into the total market level, or do we even want to forecast by shop type? the granularity also in the product dimensions. We want to look at category level, sub-brand, brands, pack sizes, SKU. And then what is the forecast horizon? Forecast horizons vary so much, also depending on how you intend to use your forecast. So in the strategic planning, you will see usually the forecast is a little bit longer. It's a bit more risky as well. Hence, the simulations are very important. Or are we looking at the 10 next week and being super, super precise with this? So these are usually the questions we're asking. And when we talk about a typical timing plan and how this is getting implemented, so there's a little bit of a phase of setting up for success, which is setting up the infrastructure, collecting the data. And what you see here is designed effectively for something which is, I want to go to scale after. If you just want to have 20 categories forecasted, then this is much, much quicker than we're talking a couple of weeks. But saying you want to go 1 to 2 categories on the countries by category, by brand, by SKU. This is the time we effectively talking about, because you want to see, you want to understand first. So before you go completely at scale, you just have a piece of the business to understand this actually works for us. You can look into this, you can get the confidence that it works. And then in the next stage, you go at scale. And going at scale is very, very quick indeed. When you think about that, I have set everything up. Everything is now running automatically. And now I go to scale. So you are there in 3 months to have, saying the next 30 countries, it might be 40 countries or less. But this in general is effectively the time we are talking about if you want to go at scale. And now I think I take questions. We quickly check.
Yeah, there's a number of questions in the chat. And I think some of them you addressed, but there's a couple of others here. I addressed one around just the difference between AI forecasting versus traditional. One of the first questions here, I'll throw it over to you, was around just some of the demand drivers. I know you had a slide in there of some of the data elements that go into like feeding the model. Can you talk more about that?
Yes. So what feeds the model? So how it works in real life is effectively understanding the business, what drives the business. And I think one can say that in most businesses, whatever the industry, you still talk about the price of a product. There is, the activation you're going to do. And why is this important in the future is if I want to forecast my products or my business is impacted by what I'm doing. And for this, I also want to have some sort of understanding what this is, what I'm going to do. And so you look for these drivers, which are really, really important for the future. However, in forecasting, you do not want to overload your system with 20 drivers potentially, and each one adds 0.1%. You are hunting down for the big impacts on the business, because this is something you can control. And if this changes, then it also has an impact on the forecast. So saying, I give you an example for price. Price, I predict my price to increase by 10%, and it has a huge impact on my volume. So I lose consumers because I'm going to increase the price. That's the plan. But now I'm choosing actually to decrease my price. I would have a very, very different forecast because now I attract consumers. And this is something to think through when we think about the drivers, is what is really, really important. On the other hand, you don't want to stretch too much, because you have to think then through each single of these drivers and how you forecast them.
Okay, perfect. The next one here, thank you guys for putting all these great questions in the chat, by the way.
Yes.
I'll just be the moderator. Let's see. You mentioned some changes post-COVID to the model. And the question here was, what drivers or tweaks did you feed the model at the indicated COVID? I think it was one of your examples that you were sharing.
Yes, exactly. So for COVID, it was several things. There's something I think which was pretty much underlined by Russ as well, which is that March and April was a very, very unusual period. So it was not, you know, what is used today as much as cases, it's mobility. But in this case, it was, what is the difference of my forecast to my actual data? And the algorithms are designed to pick up these changes. Now I'm in a much better position because I can feed something in. But this sensing of, I got my forecast wrong, I'm talking now, I'm an algorithm effectively. I got my forecast wrong. I see my actual data. I then, as an algorithm, can adjust to that change because I know that it was wrong what I did. Now, once you then have more data, and you can think about it in a similar way, saying, I have a new product entry coming into a marketplace. It could be the same. No idea, I don't have any data at this stage. But what I can do, I can sense that something is not working anymore. And I can change, and these models change the trend. They sense that there's something not right. Now, if I want to control and want to understand what is happening with COVID, now we have data, and for COVID we use mobility, and there are X number of different mobilities coming to the workplace. It can be leisure, etc. We also sometimes use cases where it might be of any interest. It can be school closures for some companies. This is a really, really important feature, actually. Is a school closed or not? So it's a variation of these, and it needs to fit with the business. But most businesses have actually quite a good idea what it is we're looking for.
Perfect. All right, the next one's over to Russell. In terms of the data that you're looking at, the metrics, which I love, by the way, what are the things you're looking forward to, or like as you're thinking about other trends, or looking, like as you're measuring, like are there things that are top of mind, or things you're keeping an eye on, or expectations of trends that you're looking for, or anything around that?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few that come to mind. So, for example, the explosion of rapid grocery would be one of them. So we've had the explosion of in-store and click and collect, and then the next one is definitely rapid grocery. That's growing exponentially. You know, in the UK, we've got people setting up in railway bridges, their little stores with robots go around doing the pickings. That's one of them that would be a factor that we really need to consider. And also, within Nielsen and traditional reads, a lot of these sales aren't captured within our traditional read. So as the consumers are, you know, spreading their wings and buying from different areas, Nielsen are having to play catch up to try and, you know, pursue what we're doing. And you can see that with our latest acquisition for people like Data Impact and Rakuten. So we can make we can keep as much of the value sales from our shoppers within our universe. And that's the biggest change that I've seen, would be rapid grocery is intense,
Awesome.
to say the least.
Yeah, that's perfect. All right, that's great. Thanks, Russell. And then I know we're getting close on time here. There's still a few more. I'll throw this one back over on the Fractal side. So as we're looking at that 12-week timeline, so this is an interesting one. I'm thinking about the model building, and like another question here on how do you get started quickly? Can you test things out in a couple of weeks? Like, does Fractal build those models? Does the customer build those models? Like, what's the—
No, the customer could potentially have access to the models and build themselves if they do, but usually we build the models. I mean, we build the models, again, sounds a little bit too handcrafted, because this is not necessarily how it really works. So in this engine, you have these 25 algorithms, and I feed the data in. Now, what I can do is I can say with my data set, I only need 5 of these because of the specific kind of data I'm working with. So I can choose these. I can also let all 25 run and let the engine build it itself. So I can effectively say what I want, or I let the engine build the models themselves. it's less handcrafted in that regard. So when we say, yes, we build the models, but I would more say we prepare everything. We understand the data very well, because this is critical to understanding when you interpret the results afterwards, the algorithms that were chosen, and you still need to make a sense check. But there is a lot of automation in there. And hence, that brings me to the time as well. Because it is so fast, you can then very quickly, you don't need to go through this 12 weeks process. You have data, you get the data, you throw it at the engine, and out comes a forecast. Now, that can be, in a couple of weeks, effectively, so you don't talk so long. There's still, especially when you start setting this up, there's this element of, I really need to understand what I'm doing here. So that's something we're not staying away from. So there's this bid that is not flying completely blindly. There's definitely questioning of, are you sure that this is really important to your business? Why do you think this is important? So these discussions need to be had, but the rest is very automated.
Awesome. And then a link onto that was, we talked a lot about AI, ML. One question here was, do you need AI, ML to make a better forecast, or like, how does that?
That's a very good question. So I can say that depending on where you stand as a company, where you stand with your forecast. So we have companies that are really, really sophisticated already. And then the more sophisticated you get better, because what AI machine learning does, it gets you very, very quickly to a better accuracy. I mean, I have not seen an example where this is not the case. Sometimes the jumps are dramatic. However you do it, you use AI, ML, your accuracy is get immediately better. But then this is the first success. Everybody gets really excited about this. And for this, you don't need the most sophisticated one. It's just, some basics algorithms already do it, because they still are better than what we humans can do. Now, in the next stage, however, if I want to go, saying I have my accuracy, moved it from 60 to 80%. Now what? It's not that a company would say, actually, we don't want to get any better than how we are at the moment. So while everybody is still, appreciating what it does, the next step is how do we go now from 80 to 85? And it gets more and more complicated, and with it, the math as well. So the big jump at the moment don't need the most sophisticated one. You already make a huge jump. But for the next 5% and the next 5%, this is where it gets more and more sophisticated in the methodology and the algorithms that need to be used. And the sensing needs to get more and more sensitive, effectively.
Perfect. I think we're close to the end of our time.
Okay.
So I guess I'll wrap us up. So thank everybody for being here. I know I speak on behalf of all three of us. We had a lot of fun actually preparing for today. And it's fun to prepare because it's such a relevant topic. And so I know there's some other tangential questions, probably some questions about how do you get started. All three of us are on LinkedIn. All of our information's out there, or you can follow up with us directly and we can dive deeper into how to get started in this space. And I hope all of you have a great Tuesday, and thank you again.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.